Now let's round up this Solid Utilities toolbox and look at this one, which is Change Smart Solid Display, and the last one on the toolbox, which is Remove Entity by Size. I'm going to work on this cube, but before I do so, I'm going to do some editing. So I'm going to start the Fillet Edges tool. Now just notice that I'm using a radius of 8. Just keep that in mind for later. So I'm going to select the top edge, then hold down the Control key and pick up the other 3 edges. Data point again, and there is my fillet. Let's have a look at that in Shaded. 4 filleted edges, back to wireframe. Now let's work on this next tool, which is the Change Smart Solid Display. This is the Tool Settings window, and we see several values here. We see the ISO line values. We have U rules and V rules, and the rules are really the ISO lines themselves. And we have 10 in each direction. We can change the display mode from wireframe to surfaces, leave it in wireframe for the moment. And we can suppress the display of rule lines. B-spline faces, which we'll be looking at in the next video series, and complex blending faces, which would include fillets. So let's just leave things as they are for the moment. And we'll go in and select the solid, and nothing happens. We're at the sort of base display at this point. Let's change this from wireframe to surfaces and select again. And now we see a little more of the filleted surface. We can see the curve. And we do see some ISO lines, 1 in the center and 2 at right angles. Let's change things further, and let's take off the suppression of the blending faces and try it again. Now we see quite a lot of rule lines, in fact 10 by 10. So there's 10 in this direction, that's these, and we have 10 running up the slope of the fillet, so 10 by 10. If I change these numbers, then we'll see a different display of the ISO lines. What this does is just give you an idea of the curves of those fillets. Now that's really all that happens here. It's just a display. The ISO display lines have no effect whatsoever on the solid entity at all, purely for visual purposes. So experiment with that a little bit. Try it on different objects which you've already got. Change the number of rules, change the options, and see how things look. Now move on to the next or last tool, which is Remove Entity by Size. And what this does is physically remove certain types of entities. And entities in this case are blends, which have a radius, i.e. the fillet. Holes and faces can also be removed. And we can set values for the size of those entities. I'm going to set a value of 10 for the blend radiuses. So in other words, the fillets here, I'm setting a radius of 10. Now, as you know, I drew these fillets with a radius of 8. So that is a larger size than the actual fillet itself. But let's see what happens here. Go into data point on the object. It highlights the 4 fillets to be removed. I data point again, and they're removed. Now this is interesting because the value of 10 is not the value of the original fillets. So what's happening here is this tool will remove entities of this value and lower. So equal to or less than the value that you set. Now that's a very significant point. Add to that the fact that all blends, in this case fillets, and other types of blends of this size or less will be removed as well. Now think about that for a second. That can really wreak havoc with your drawing. Without you knowing it, this tool can erase all of these entities all over the drawing. And with a value in this case of 10 or less, which could be an awful lot of blends and radiuses and so on. So this could be quite disastrous if you're not very careful. So great thought is required before you use this. In fact, I would suggest not even using this tool at all. It really is too dangerous unless you're using it under very, very controlled conditions. Now, that brings us to the end of the solids drawing and editing tools. And it's very important that you do a review of these because you have to be completely aware of what tools are available in order to make decisions about how you will go about designing something. And that will only come if you understand all of the tools and how they're applied. So I would strongly suggest going back over these last few videos just to quickly refresh your memory about the tools. because as we go further and further into this course, you'll need those tools with the various exercises I'm going to present to you.